Right, let's get started. I don't know if anyone will watch this, but um, got some good feedback after my first video, so hoping this one will be interesting to you. Overall, the feedback was positive. You liked the thinking out loud process. You liked that the video was relatively short. I'm going to try and keep these under 45 minutes, and hopefully something that you can put on in the background while you're working, and then perk up and maybe pay attention if something catches your attention. Or I don't know. We'll see how that goes. I did get a request to do more coding in the videos, and we'll probably do that at some point. I don't know if that's going to happen today because there's not a lot of building that needs to happen today. I'm just kind of going through, catching up on issues that came in last night over the weekend. And some forum posts. These are usually support threads, and a random article I found about Caddy, and it's about Caddy too, so it might actually be worth putting under some scrutiny, because Caddy 1 articles, they just will probably need to be rewritten, but it might be good we might learn some things by going through this article. So let's start here. So I guess we'll just start in, let's start down here. So this is a feature request to cache DNS requests. When running Caddy as a reverse proxy with host names as the target, it appears to do a DNS request for each HTTP call. It would be helpful to cache that, basically. I think I could see why that is. This is a little tricky though. I'm assuming, yeah, so I'm assuming that whatever DNS resolver Caddy the Go runtime is using should do the caching for us. And so I wonder if this is a misconfiguration with DNS resolvers or something like that. I know Go recently updated DNS resolution, and I don't recall what they do now for DNS. Yeah, I don't know. I'd have to search that up. But let's see here. DNS going DNS resolution. What do they do now? 2017. Let's sort by. I don't know. Kind of sort by like past year, I guess. DNS rabbit hole. Want something authoritative. Oh, fun. Okay, I'll have to look this up another time, but because I know that Go has like a built-in DNS resolver, and I'm not sure when it uses that versus when it uses the system DNS resolver. Okay, I'm gonna come back to this. That issue is not particularly interesting to me, at least on a Caddy level. We don't really implement DNS logic for the reverse proxy, so this is an issue that we looked at just a few minutes on the last live stream for the replace response plugin, which this plugin basically searches and replaces in response bodies. So you can kind of rewrite web pages and content this way. We have Caddy file support. So it doesn't seem to work here. I was able to reproduce this issue where, yeah, it doesn't perform the replacement. Oh wait, no, I was not able to this is not the one. Sorry, that was a different issue. This one I haven't tried reproducing yet. The error message, so the error message that he's getting is think was that? It's still early for me. So I'm a little tired. Oh yeah. Oh, it was up here. Short internal buffer. This comes from the transform package. So, yeah, different code block. Yeah, so this error message does not actually come from anything I wrote or anything that the library we use in this plugin wrote. So this error message is an unexported value, which is already making me nervous because you see that? If the error message is unexported, that means probably it would only be either like a developer, like you're using the package wrong, or it should only occur, probably should only occur from code within the package. Like unexporting an error value makes it difficult to work with, because these errors, because they're exported, you would expect them to be, these are probably common errors that could happen because of at runtime problems, or whatever. Whereas these unexported errors probably should only be occurring if there's like a bug in how the library is used or in the library itself. It should be something that you catch during development. So let's see where this error is used. So it's in this function called transform, which we do call, or our library that we're using calls. And it looks like if an error is returned from this underlying transform function, then it does a switch here in the error value, and actually does a switch on the exported error values, which is kind of interesting. So if the buffer for the destination is too short or too small, it looks like it will return that error in some cases, but the destination buffer is too small but is completely empty. Return a fatal error as this transformation can never complete. And it returns that short internal buffer error. Similar kind of thing here if the source is too short. In some cases it will return, so source bytes were depleted before filling up the destination buffer. Okay, verify we made some progress. Move the remaining bytes to the error start and try to get more source bytes. But there were not enough source bytes to proceed while the source buffer cannot hold any more bytes. Return a fatal error as this transformation can never complete. So the buffer is too small, maybe? Again, I don't understand this code without diving into it more. But these are the only two occurrences of this. So there might be some bad state within the transformer. I pinged IC Holy on this, who tried to reproduce it, because we use his library to wrap this underlying transform lib. It's really useful because it the wrapper makes streaming transformations a lot easier and just makes it much easier to use. So and then the OP is asking if there's anything wrong with the config file, and there isn't, except Francis makes a good point that a lot of these are usually unnecessary. In fact, your logs will show warnings. So a lot of people set header up values that are unnecessary. Enough that we wrote some warnings in so that you don't need it. So this one you could get rid of. I think you could get rid of this one. I think this is set for you automatically. You might need xrealIP if your proxy backend needs that particular header, but xforwarded4 is more common. So I don't know where, if people are coming up with this themselves or if they're copying and pasting from some tutorial, but really these aren't necessary, and oftentimes we see that people are breaking their applications unknowingly by just adding stuff to their config. So like, don't do that unless unless you have a specific reason to have to put something in your config. Okay, so 2 hours ago, Icy Holy replied that the regex transformer is stateful, but he thinks it's being used concurrently here. So let's look at that. Line 93. So this is in the provision method. So when a Caddy module is loaded, when a config is loaded, it will call the provision function. And this function is actually not called concurrently. So this happens before any HTTP requests happen, which serve HTTP will get called concurrently during requests, but not provision. So this particular line shouldn't be getting called concurrently, especially not on this particular value. And so we use this to create a transform chain, which we then store on the handler. The transform chain is then utilized here to create a new writer. If that's not safe for concurrent use, then that would be good to know. We also use it here. Oh yeah, because if we're streaming, our function is very simple. If we're not streaming, we're buffering things, then we go down this path. So as far as I know, I'm not using this library incorrectly, but maybe I am. So we can either reconstruct the chain every time we use a sync.pool. I mean, this might be worth trying. You know, he would know better than I would. So maybe this is a matter of we try it and, you know, and have OP test it on in their deployment, or see if we can reproduce it. I mean, I don't love the idea of reconstructing the chain every time. That sounds inefficient. But I mean, maybe it would be better to add some synchronization even, or make the underlying type more thread safe. I don't know. So that's probably what I'll comment on. I'm not going to do that in the video for the sake of time. I won't write out the comment right now, but I'll go back later and do that. I'm trying to watch comments today. The video is set at like normal latency, so it might be a few seconds delayed. I see a couple comments to make on-demand TLS, and sure, I can go through. We have really good docs for that. I can just go through a wiki here about that. Let's do that really quick, actually. So it's this article. We have in our automatic HTTPS page, we have docs for on-demand TLS. We explain how it works, and then we have a link to this wiki article. So we tell you how to use it, and then we have a link to the wiki article that shows you specifically how to set it up. So the wiki article is actually just how to serve a whole bunch of domains with Cadi, and so there's different ways to do this. You can use a wildcard certificate, which you have to use the DNS challenge for. You could do some custom mapping of like host names to backends or whatever. You can use subdomains. But yeah, if you want to use like registered domain names, you have to use that typically on demand. And so we explain kind of why and how this works. The config is actually really simple just to enable it, and that is set your listener on the HTTPS port, but obviously we don't specify the domain names here because we don't know what the domain names are. You might have tens of thousands of customers with each bringing their own domain name that you don't control. So all you do is start a listener on the HTTPS port, which is 443, You could also write this as :443. And then you configure using the TLS directive, you just enable on demand. And Cadi will manage certificates that come in on demand. Now, of course, this could be abused. So we have this scary warning that this is insecure because clients can send whatever TLS handshakes they want to your server. And if they put a server name in there, they can spam server names and abuse your server and try and get certificates for a lot of domains that it can't get certificates for. So when you deploy to production, you really need to enable some protections. And you do this at the top of your Caddy file with the on-demand TLS global option. So if you're familiar with the Caddy file, you have the global options block at the top. These are optional, of course, but in this case, you want to use it so that for on-demand certificate management, Caddy will go to a local endpoint that you have to create. Like here, we're doing something on port 5555, and Caddy will make HTTP requests here when it gets a TLS handshake for a certain domain name, and it'll say, hey, can I get a certificate for this domain? Is that allowed? And it'll put the domain in the query string. And then this endpoint that you write would probably check a database to see if like this domain name is recognized, if it's associated with a customer. And if so, then it will return 200 and Caddy will get the certificate. You can also put in some rate limiting here, but really as long as you have the ask endpoint, that's kind of the most important thing. The rate limiting, I should say throttling. Well, maybe it is rate limiting. It's rate limiting because I don't think, I don't remember. I don't think we block. I think we just reject if we pass the rate limits. I don't think we hold on to it. So yeah, the ask endpoint is very important to prevent abuse, but that's really all you need. Just listen on port 443, enable on demand, and then set the ask endpoint. At least do that, and then you're good to go. You can serve custom domain names with a static config. So hopefully that answered that question. Okay, so these next issues are my archiver repo, which I have to admit is a little neglected lately for how much it gets used. It is a really helpful little library, but I have nothing to. I have not worked on that lately. Most of my time demands, based on sponsorships, are not for the archiver library. They're for the Caddy project, and so. Oh, mistake PR. This happens a lot. I wonder if people are using like CI tooling or like Git tooling that is easy to like open up a pull request accidentally. I wonder if there's some weird issue in the UI or the usability of Git clients that makes it easy to accidentally open pull requests. It's fine. It's kind of interesting to see that people are like using the library and stuff, but you know. So it's HTTP 3 bug. So people have been reporting that HTTP 3, which is still experimental, even though the draft I think is done or getting finalized. The implementation is still experimental, so because it's really complicated. And we use a library for this. It's a pretty good library. It's maintained by Lux Clemente and Martin Seaman, who we pinged here in this issue. But so it stops working after any kind of reload. That's not awesome. I mean, this used to work, so maybe did we break something or did something change upstream? We're not really sure yet. This is the one I was able to reproduce a couple weeks ago. And yeah, it did used to work, so I just kind of deferred to people who might know better here. But then recently we had another issue on the forum where something similar came up, and so I've not seen any logged errors using debug mode. Curl HTTP 3 on a large file doesn't seem to work. Download some data and then receive nothing more. We didn't change anything about the shutdown logic recently. So this is the author of the upstream, the quick implementation, or the HTTP3 implementation we're using. Is there any way to easily reproduce this? I mean, he's saying that it's hard to trigger kind of on demand or when you want to. I was able to reproduce the original issue pretty easily, reload Caddy, and then yeah, the curl command, it would stop using HTTP3. So yeah, that was unfortunate. Let's see here. Sorry for all the scrolling. My mind is kind of ADHD when I am trying to process things. So the curl issue is reproducible 100%. Chrome and Firefox switch over to HTTP2 with no regard for this fast fallback timeout setting. Need some help reproducing it, debugging it. This is odd behavior. Quick is not supported, HTTP3 is supported. Attempted 4 connections. So quick is the underlying transport for HTTP3. Maybe they're referring to the old spec, the draft specs of that. Because they were merged into one standard HTTP3 spec eventually. Attempted 4 connections, received packets for 4 connections, successful handshake for 2 connections. Yeah, that is kind of weird. I mean, we're not really interested in supporting the quick drafts anymore, so I think that's actually okay. I do think it's weird that 2 of the 4 connections fail. And there's some qlog output here. This should be fun. Oh, it downloaded it. Great. Okay, cool. I think Martin will have a better process for tackling this. Yeah, and this is the unfortunate reality of a lot of open source troubleshooting. This is an issue. It is an experimental feature, so I'm not too surprised, and I don't feel too much pressure to fix it right now. I do want to work on it. I don't want to spend time on the video maybe working on it because I don't know. That's probably not interesting. Me just sitting here looking at it, thinking, I wonder what it could be, and doing a lot of Googling. Maybe that would be interesting, but I think I would rather offer commentary and my thought process on these, and then dive deep later off the stream when it's not, so that it's not as boring, I suppose. If I'm wrong about that, let me know, but... Okay, so here's a pull request to create a new OpenTelemetry module. I think, is it OpenTelemetry that just hit 1.0? This module is compatible with the OpenTelemetry specification, can be enabled in the Caddy file. That's cool. This looks... I know that we have an issue, actually, asking for OpenTelemetry. A closed issue. Oh, metrics monitoring in V2. Oh, that was the only mention of it. I thought we had... Maybe it was in the forum. No results. 2 words? 11 days ago, I would plan to make a PR that will add support for OpenTelemetry. Is this the same person? It is. Okay, I thought I was hearing about this recently. So Dave Henderson is our resident telemetry monitoring guy. He implemented our existing metrics support into Caddy. So the reason he put it off was because of API breaking changes when it's RC3 a couple weeks ago. So when it settles down at 1.0, we can review a PR. So I looked at his proposal and I gave some feedback. Then he came back about some more details. cool. Some praise on the docs. Really appreciate that. So his proposal is to have a separate OpenTelemetry directive. Whereas it's interesting because my initial thought was telemetry or like monitoring, request tracing and stuff should be baked into the handler chain, like between the directives, between the middlewares. And okay, so to explain this really quick, we have this file called routes.go, and it defines what an HTTP route looks like in the HTTP server. It basically has matchers and handlers. And if the request matches the matchers, then the handlers are executed. And those handlers are tied together in a middleware chain. So we do this here. It's basically a for loop that, you know, the middleware pattern, you use a loop and you pass the next handler into the function, and the handler has a handle to the next handler. It's very recursive. And so we compile that here, and yeah, so here's where it gets the next. It returns a handler function. There's like a weird bug here, a bunch of comments. I never did revisit that. Yeah, blessed to do. But anyway, the point is that when we wrap a middleware, this is pretty deep. Like there's a ton of wrapping and looping going on. But at one point, I remember seeing, when I wrote this originally, like 2 years ago, I was like, oh, this would be cool. We could implement request tracing here because we could see exactly the handlers in memory that are being invoked for each request. We could see which handlers it's coming from and going to, and how the request changes between handlers. So we could even do like diffing, and really, this is a really cool part of the code. There's no way to really reach it right now because tracing, I was like, I don't want to deal with that right now. We can figure that out later. But there's some really powerful capabilities that we could expose here. So I suggested that in this issue, and it looks like this guy has more experience, it sounds like, with telemetry and tracing than I do, but he would like to have it configurable per route rather than implementing it between all the directives. I still think my approach would be really interesting. If anyone wants to tackle that and integrate maybe with this somehow, that would be cool. But I'm also okay with this. I don't have a strong opinion about it. I think a directive is great if it meets certain people's use cases. So okay, so fast forward to today, he opened the pull request, and yeah, this looks really well put together. So he clearly, like, his experience, he knows what he's doing. Looks like it already went through some review here from Dave, which I appreciate because I'm not familiar with this ecosystem. Wow, a whole bunch of stuff happened in the last few hours. This is awesome. Cool. I will take a look at this in more detail later. Wow, this is a big change. Holy moly. Okay, yeah, this will be fun. We're looking at 1,000 additions and 1 subtraction. Where's the 1 subtraction? Oh, maybe it's here in the go.sum. It makes sense. You're adding a new module, so because Cadi's so extensible, if you want to add functionality, you just make new files. You don't have to change any of the existing code, so it kind of makes sense. Anyway, we'll see. It'll be interesting to see if this gets implemented into the core of Cadi or as a plugin. I'm not sure yet. There has to be a really good reason now to build it into the core, like the standard distribution of Cadi, as opposed to being a third-party plugin. Okay, sorry. So I'm seeing the comments here on the video. Again, I have normal latency set, so it's higher video quality, but there's probably a delay with the comments. I don't think it's like a 10-minute delay, but I think it's at least 30 seconds. So I saw this come in a while ago, but I want to revisit it. So issue number 7, so referring to this replace response issue, doesn't seem like it's unsafe to use concurrently when you call transform. So if your transformer chain execs concurrently, then your replace lib will need to be guarded. Or it is unsafe to use concurrently. Oh, so if we execute the transformer chain concurrently, then the replace lib will need to be guarded. I see. So, and that, yeah, that might be the case. And that's kind of what I was thinking, like, if the use of this chain is not safe, like this line that the other author, highlighted, this is not concurrent. But if the chain itself cannot be used concurrently, then yes, we probably have a logical race condition at least. So, oops. I'll yeah, definitely bring that up in the issue. Thank you for pointing that out. Okay, and then reverse proxy debug log to error log. So this issue is opened by a Stripe employee, which is really cool to see that involvement here. Trying to debug some errors, there's a log line in the reverse proxy that logs an error at the debug level. So I saw this and immediately realized, by the way, did you guys notice that I have my tab size set to 4 on GitHub? You can customize that now instead of the ungodly 8. Anyways, so in the reverse proxy, the way it works is, let me show you. This is serve HTTP for the reverse proxy. So there's a whole bunch of setup here in preparation to do the proxying, and then there's a proxy loop. It's condition lists, so technically it could be an infinite loop, but it's written carefully so that it's not. We select an upstream, fill in the dial information, and get ready to dial that particular backend, and then we actually proxy to that backend. But the proxy is written so that that it's robust to errors. So if there is an error proxying to one backend, the loop will take note of that error and decide what to do. Maybe it will it'll wait and then try another upstream. And so this is very it's a pretty robust loop. We've been using this kind of logic for years. But this underlying reverse proxy method can return an error. And so we do the round trip using the transport module. The default transport module is HTTP, but there are other ones like fastCGI and NTLM and whatnot. Basically, it gives us the response. But if there was an error performing the round trip, then we have a debug log here, and we return the error. And the OP is saying that I noticed that this is logging an error at the debug level, and so it did take me some time to find because in production we don't have debug logs enabled, which is fair enough. And I saw this, and it was late at night. I think it was, okay, it was only 6:30 p.m., but I was tired apparently, and I was like immediately, oh yeah, duh, that obviously isn't right, and I changed it to log at the error level, and also put the duration up here instead. And then Francis pointed out to me that is actually a mistake. This is intentionally debug level because this is not the final error, and this is not the final log for a particular round trip. This is a failed round trip. So on a successful round trip, we do log it at the debug level. But on a failed round trip, we log it and return the error right away. And that error, remember, is bubbles up to this loop here where then we decide how to handle it. Is it the final error? It might not be the final error. Proxy error, the scope of that is actually above the loop. So it lives outside the loop, and we might decide that we're done. And if we're done, then we break and we do return that error, which then gets logged at the error level. But if it's not the final, if we're not done trying to load balance and trying another backend, then we can actually like we hold on to that error value unless it gets replaced by yet another one. So basically, we're debug logging the intermittent errors that are not final because the proxy has this retry logic built in. So Francis pointed this out, and I wanted to know more about like how these logs help troubleshoot the problem. And apparently it's because they were debugging context.canceled, which is where, and so it looks like they're going through 4 or 5 different layers of proxies, and so there's that's a complex setup. There's a lot going on, and context canceled errors happen usually when a client cancels the request, and in which case it's not the proxy's fault, and it's not an error that really has to be reported. Especially because it's an intermediate error. If you are debugging something, you should turn on debug logs. But if you're in production, you don't necessarily need to debug logs on, unless you're using on-demand TLS. Still recommend that. But, oh good, I'm glad you guys are finding the tab settings on GitHub. That's a new thing, and it's amazing. So, and then Francis just commented, you can close this once you've reverted it. I feel like I just got put in timeout. You can go to your room until you have thought about what you've done and cleaned your room. Then you can come out. Okay, so I need to revert that commit. And I think that's true, although I also moved the duration up here to this logger, which makes more sense because it was getting logged in both places anyway. Or I think it should get logged in both places. So I guess my change to that, let's see, what file is this? Reverseproxy.go. Debug. There, done. I'll commit that later. Okay, I'm still in timeout until I push that. Cool, so that's the main issues. How long are we at? Got a question actually in chat about, is it worth storing a chain of all errors for each backend, or is the expectation to ignore any errors so long as one backend succeeds? Okay, yeah, good question. So this logic here, let me actually use my editor because I have code intelligence here. So yeah, the question is it worth storing a chain of all the errors for each backend? So let me answer that. So when we choose an upstream, the selection policy, like with each upstream, we do actually store its health status, dial, lookup serve, max request, health check policy. We do store its health status. So the upstream consists of a host, which is an interface for reasons, but we can get the number of requests, how many recent failures, whether it is unhealthy or not, and then when we do have a new request or we do have a new failure or we do change the health status, we can mutate those. And so it's not like we forget errors that happen, but we do like discard the actual error value in the loop. So in the loop, let me go down to the loop. This is all provisioning. Here we are. Here's the loop. Notice that we only keep track of the one error, and that's because ultimately the request is proxied successfully or it is not. If it is not, there is an error. There might be multiple errors in the interim that result in a final error. We just use the last error tried from the last upstream. And this is because we do log the intermittent errors. So if we go to reverse proxy And it's this right here. We do emit debug logs for the intermittent errors. So if you're troubleshooting, you can still see the error values, but we only bubble up the last error to the HTTP server itself to report that and respond with a 502 or whatever other error code. But handling more than one error together is a little tricky, so we just log them instead. Okay. Anyway, that I think is all the issues I wanted to go over. I don't want to take up a whole ton of time. Yeah, I'm a little behind on issues. Some of these are kind of in-depth or involve kind of weighty design decisions. And if you haven't been able to tell, context switching, like in my head, is really tricky because all of these issues are so different, and it really requires a lot of focus to just choose one, sit down, think about it, what's the best way to do this, and actually like come up with a good solution and work with people to make something work that's really good, as opposed to just like, yeah, it looks good, sure, go ahead, I don't know, figure it out. Like, I might do that initially, but I want to be more involved as it progresses or before we commit to anything. So I won't go into too much depth in this video, but okay, so back to the forum. There are a few issues here. I think this could be interesting. Strange records and log about goo.xyz. No matching certificates for this random hostname. Yeah, so this happens a lot, and this is exactly what I was talking about. Saw a new question come in. I'll get to that in a second. So this is what I was talking about earlier when talking about on-demand TLS. Clients can just send random trash to your server, and they have to deal with it. So here, this looks like trash to me. You can simply point any domain at any server, or you don't even need to point a domain at it. You can just make a handshake with a server and just put whatever in the server name indicator and spam your server. So it just means some bot is trying to make a request to your server. It does not have the certificate matching that domain. They're harmless debug messages, yep. But they're useful if you are like under attack. You can maybe identify patterns. Like if there's some relation to some pattern in the server name, maybe you can kind of find out what the bot is doing. Are they just trying a bunch of random numbers? You can find out if the client IP addresses are the same. If they're the same, it's just a single rogue program hitting your server. If it's different and they have a lot of similarities in how they're behaving, like in their server names, then you're probably under a DDoS attack, especially if it's like a severely high traffic. And those problems are really hard to solve without help from a CDN, no matter your web server. I mean, you can implement blocking logic and stuff. You could do that in Cadi too, but the best way to defend against a DDoS is to have more computers than the other guy, basically. So that's not necessarily what's happening here. I'm just let my mind wander. This thread was interesting. You know, bless our helpers for helping people. So, you know, Shane, sorry in advance for this, asking a very basic question. I mean, Shane, it's okay to like be new to things. Downloaded Cadi, isn't really sure how to set it up. Not really sure how to use the command line, and I mean, that's kind of a prerequisite for using web server, is you gotta know how to run programs on your computer. I would just Google that, honestly. Like, there are great videos explaining it. There are a ton of tutorials, I'm sure. And so this is why we do say in our docs that when you're getting started, We do, as a prerequisite, require command line skills and text editor skills. And I know that's new to some people, and that's fine, but it's not really like the job of our documentation to teach that. And you can ask in the forums, it's just that we're specialized in using Cadi, not necessarily in using like system stuff, or I don't know, but some of our helpers are really nice, and you know, Matthew, Francis, AJ, this guy. So that's really nice. We appreciate all who help in the forums. Can Caddy terminate SSL through any API? This is a question on the chat. Yes, if I understand the question correctly, yes, terminating SSL, now called TLS, is orthogonal to whatever APIs are being served. So they have it at different layers of the network. So yeah, you can use it for anything. Appreciate your comments in the chat. That's kind of fun. This is my first time like interactively doing this, so kind of appreciate that. Let me clean this up here. Before I finish, it might be kind of fun to look through this. Holy smokes, I've been going for over an hour. You guys got to keep me on the ball. Sorry, this was a longer one. Let me go through this article really quick and critique this. So this is just a random article I found from Google on how to forge Linux tutorials. This is how to install and configure Caddy web server with PHP and Mariadb on Ubuntu 20. So configure the firewall. Yes, make sure that you allow HTTP and HTTPS. Yes, good idea. This might already be done if you are using a firewall. I don't know, firewalls maybe aren't on by default, but if they are, I don't know actually, but it's, yes, you will definitely need these ports open. Install Caddy. So there are several ways to install it. Yes, this is true. We know, so this is a little outdated. We no longer use Fury for our apt repos, our Debian repos. We had some weird issues with it. And so we switched to Cloudsmith. So always, I would recommend, we go to the main site here, documentation. If you go to our install, we have official distributions for Debian, Ubuntu, Raspbian. I would just follow these instructions. Honestly, when it comes to writing Caddy tutorials, please just link to our docs. Don't repeat what our docs say, because our docs are going to be current and correct, and tutorials often get forgotten about. And we have to go through and help a lot of people who follow tutorials wrong and say, basically, yeah, just start over, because that tutorial was old and I don't know what it was doing, or if it was doing like the right thing for what you need. Just follow our docs. So if you're writing a Caddy tutorial and something is already covered step by step, especially specific commands or specific config in our docs, maybe just link to our docs instead. That would save a lot of trouble for everyone. Yes, we did change our distribution method, but we're allowed to do that, and we had to do that for good reason. So, but yes, the basic idea is run these commands, Caddy will get installed, and this is explaining how to install PHP. Open http:// in your browser. I guess you can do that. Normally you would put like localhost or something in there, but that's, yeah, that'll work. Install PHP. Great. Install Mariadb. I mean, okay, the tutorial is about those. So yes, you don't need those for a lot of sites, but if you are using PHP and a database, this is a great option. Okay, skip that part because I'm not super interested in those. Step 6, configure Caddy. Configured in several ways, API calls, JSON, or Caddy file. That's true. Caddy file is the easiest way to configure Caddy. That's probably also true. Before we configure Caddy, we should create the root directory for our site. Yeah, you'll need a place to put your site. Place to store log files. Sure. Use your Caddy. Yep. Give permissions to the log directory so that Caddy can access and write to it. Yes. We'll definitely need to do that. Generated a default Caddy file in installation. Yes, that's correct. So yeah, this is what our default Caddy file looks like right now. It's just a file server out of this folder, user share Caddy. Didn't we make a folder? So this tutorial makes a separate folder, var www.example.com/html. That's fine. This is also a reasonable place to put your site. I guess it just depends, whatever you want. Make sure you customize this then. So since you're using a different folder, var www.example.com/html, make sure you put that here. Good, so the tutorial says that. But then it says replace the above code with the following code. Why not just follow the instructions in the code? Like, you can do this, but I'm already wondering, like, why you need to completely replace all of this with this. Like, we ship a default config file so that you don't have to use a different boilerplate. Especially, I mean, experimental HTTP 3, so this is also outdated. This is an experimental API, so you would need to look at our docs to see how to enable HTTP 3 now. It's more powerful, more flexible. Example.com, you should put your domain name in there instead. Okay, the root line, that's fine. Okay, so this log thing, it's fine. You don't need all of this, though. Like, log rolling, don't change it unless you have a specific reason to. The tutorial doesn't explain why it's changing it. It's changing it for kicks. You're allowed to do that. I would just not recommend that unless you need to. Caddy's defaults are good for most sites, so I mean, if you want to specify so this enables access logs. Yeah, good. I'm glad they specify that. Caddy won't log anything. Not entirely true. Caddy will log stuff, but not HTTP requests without this. We need to configure output to go to the log file that we made a folder for. That's true, but you could omit this entire block that configures rolling, and the formatting. Like, you could omit, I mean, you can customize that if you want to, but typically I would just leave it on Caddy's standard JSON logs. Enabling compression, that's fine. Z-standard is not used by any clients or any browsers yet, at least, not any mainstream browsers. Hopefully soon they will, and that's a great compression format. Caddy's ready for it. Proxying to pass CGI for PHP stuff, that's great. You might need the file server enabled if you're serving a PHP site, unless your PHP backend is also serving all the static files. You'll probably need to enable the file server. Yeah, so actually all of this explanation is very good. This TLS block, I'm a little confused though. Let's see. Here we have enabled support for TLS 1.2 and 1.3. You don't need to do this. Actually, I would recommend taking this out. Please don't customize security defaults unless you have a specific need to change them. These are the defaults, so here you're just actually like dating your config and making it rigid and in like unupgradable or whatever. So if you update Caddy, that maybe, I don't know, someday, well, the protocol versions are less egregious, but like maybe someday TLS 1.2 is broken, Caddy will probably disable TLS 1.2 by default, and but this config would keep your server vulnerable. So like, don't do that. Putting an email address here is not a bad idea so that the CA can contact you if there is a problem with your certificates. And then restart the server. Yeah, sounds great. Caddy will generate certificate automatically. Yep. And the rest of this is testing PHP stuff over HTTPS. Sounds great. Yeah, I mean, not a bad tutorial. I would definitely change some things. Make it a little more timeless. Take out some of the unnecessary stuff. And yeah, I think that is all I have to say there. Go forth and serve and write, which is funny because my university's like motto slogan thing on their signboards is go forth and serve, and that makes sense in the context of web servers. Anyway, hopefully this was interesting. Sorry it was so long. I'll keep them shorter in the future.